Candyman, 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 Candyman. Candyman was a terrifying horror movie. It was also something that you said out loud in front of the mirror. Allegedly, if you said his name 5 times, the murdered slave seeking revenge would appear in the mirror and kill you with his hook. There were bees, and Candyman was really scary looking, and his hook also happened to be attached to the bloody stump on his arm. Very creepy and weird. The movie follows a graduate student named Helen who is researching the legend of Candyman in Chicago's Cabrini Green housing project. As she delves deeper into the mystery, she begins to unravel the truth behind the legend and becomes entangled in a series of terrifying events. The film explores themes of urban legends, race, gentrification, and the power of belief, leading to a chilling and suspenseful story that blurs the lines between reality and myth. I remember having sleepovers with my friends. We'd watch the movie and then we'd take turns going into the bathroom, trying to get to that magical number of 5 repetitions. I'm not sure if any of us made it. We were all just too scared. Most people associate the urban legend of the Candyman with the Candyman movie, but that's not the real-life true story. The true story doesn't have a hooked killer that comes out of the mirror or anything supernatural. It's still dark and twisted, but the most horrific part is that it's real. Based on a real-life tragedy from a woman that we will learn about, who was sadly failed by the Chicago, Illinois system. Ruthie Mae McCoy was a living example of how our institutions fail the marginalized and underprivileged. A Black woman who grew up in Chicago's South Side, she began exhibiting symptoms of mental illness in her 20s. Despite the consensus that McCoy was mentally ill, those close to her weren't able to identify her condition, only that she would talk to herself or curse at strangers on the street suddenly and unpredictably. She would later be diagnosed with residual type schizophrenia, a diagnosis that arises when someone has experienced schizophrenic episodes in the past, but is not currently exhibiting symptoms. When she was in the throes of mental illness, it affected McCoy's ability to hold down a steady job. She was never able to maintain employment for longer than a month. To make matters more difficult, she was institutionalized several times throughout her life. Eventually, in 1983, McCoy would find herself living in ABLA homes, public housing which was coincidentally located near Cabrini Green, the setting for 1992's Candyman. Despite her circumstances, there was evidence of McCoy taking steps to leave the projects in the months before her murder in 1987. McCoy had received approval for Supplemental Security Income, SSI. Not only did this double the monthly monetary assistance that she already received, SSI paid retroactively to the date of the application. This meant that McCoy's first check was nearly $2,000, and that was a hefty sum of money for someone struggling with poverty in the 80s. McCoy intended to use the check to help her leave the ABLA homes, but she also used some of the money to buy new clothes and a few household items. It wasn't extravagant spending by any stretch of the imagination, but the acquisitions would have drawn notice. Whoever killed McCoy likely targeted her because they believed that she had a large sum of money stashed in her apartment. On the evening of April 22, 1987, the Chicago Police Department received a phone call from McCoy. The frantic call confused the dispatcher. In the recordings, McCoy is saying that people had threw the cabinet down and were coming through the bathroom. Well, today we know this meant that attackers were breaking in via the bathroom medicine cabinet. The dispatcher didn't immediately make that connection. Despite the confusion, a police car was sent in response to the call. What followed was a bewilderingly display of negligence. Unfortunately, the dispatcher didn't note down that McCoy's call was a break-in. It was recorded as just a disturbance. Perhaps the misreporting can explain the lack of urgency on the part of the officer that was sent to the ABLA home. Before the car even arrived, the Chicago PD received more 911 calls from neighbors, reporting that they heard gunshots and shouting. Several officers eventually arrived at McCoy's home, but when they knocked on the door, no one answered. A couple officers went to the ABLA home's management office to retrieve the key to her apartment, but for unknown reasons, it didn't fit the door's lock. Given McCoy's frantic phone call and the follow-up reports from neighbors, you would think that the officers on the scene would attempt to overcome these setbacks. Instead, they just left. The next evening, Chicago PD would receive another phone call from another of McCoy's neighbors. The neighbor told police that McCoy normally greeted her twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, but she hadn't seen the other woman since the day before. Several police officers returned to McCoy's apartment, and once again, they knocked on McCoy's door. And once again, their calls went unanswered. And once again, instead of ascertaining McCoy's welfare, they simply left. Deborah Lastly, the neighbor who regularly saw McCoy, was not deterred. Seeing that the police would be of no help, she contacted the management office. The office sent a couple people to McCoy's apartment, who finally got the door open. There, they came upon a grisly scene. Ruthie Mae McCoy was found in her bedroom, shot multiple times and lying in a pool of her own blood. The room had been ransacked, and because it had been a couple days since the break-in had happened, the smell of decomposition had begun to pervade the apartment. Unfortunately, crimes committed in Chicago's public housing project rarely garnered widespread media coverage, especially when the victim was a mentally ill Black woman. In fact, the only reason that McCoy murder case made the Chicago Tribune as a news brief was because detectives learned that the killers had entered the home from the adjacent apartment by breaking through the bathroom's medicine cabinet. The mode of entry may have shocked some people then, but residents of ABLA told a different story. According to a 1987 article by Steve Bergera, published in the Chicago Reader, people had been breaking into apartments via medicine cabinets for over a year prior to McCoy's murder. 2 men would later be arrested for the break-in, burglary, and murder, but they were never found guilty in court. Perhaps the case of Ruthie Mae McCoy would have been forgotten had Candyman not hit theaters a few years later. Not only did the film feature similar details to her murder, such as the Chicago project setting and duplicitous bathroom mirrors, one of its characters bore the McCoy surname. With a new Candyman film that premiered in 2021, as well as another protagonist with the last name of McCoy, it looks like the real-life case of Ruthie Mae McCoy will live on in our collective memories. So what do you guys think of this one? I think, even though I love scary movies, I love Candyman, I think the case itself with Ruthie Mae is very sad, and it's nice to see things changing as time goes by a little bit. Yes, very, very sad, mysterious, definitely. What do you guys think? Thank you all for watching this episode, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments. I love you all. I will see you next time. Until told in the dark.